Welcome to Wonderful Women podcast with Susan Stewart. I hope everyone is listening, and I would ask you to share this far and wide and hit the subscribe button, please. I am so delighted today to have Lisa Buchanan with me, who is a feminist blogger. Hi, Lisa. A writer, a mother, and a women's rights activist. This season, we are covering the beautiful question of, can you share with us a time or an event that changed the trajectory of your life? And I am absolutely blown away that not one single woman that I've asked this question of has said, oh, I can't think of anything. In fact, most women like Lisa have had to go away and think about it because there's so many events and challenges that have changed our lives. So without further ado, I've stated the question, Lisa. And did I get the introduction right? Is that okay with you? And what event in your life has changed it and changed the trajectory?
Great. Thanks, Susan. Well, thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm really excited to have this conversation. And as you said, I've been thinking about it for a few weeks now. What is the one thing, or what's the sort of most significant thing that has changed the trajectory of my own life? And without a shadow of a doubt, it has to be my journey through fertility treatment to have my son. And then all that has come with motherhood since then. So I started fertility treatment, gosh, I almost can't remember now. I think it was back in 2014. And before you start, there's quite a lot of administration involved. So you sort of go to your GP, you make the referral, they pass on your details to the fertility clinic, and you're kind of in that system for about a year. So there's a lot of anticipation of, oh, when am I going to get to start treatment? And, is it going to work? Or when is it going to work? Because initially that was all I was thinking. It was definitely going to work, and it was going to work first time. And, I wasn't going to have any difficulties.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the initial phases. And then I realized that life was not going to be a nice straight line to my goal, and that all the things that I had learned as a young woman about how to make it, how to I guess build my career, how to fashion out a life for myself, all the things that I had done, which were very much based on education, work, career. Honestly, they weren't very much use to me when I was sat on the exam table with my legs in stirrups and facing fertility treatment. So I had this very effective sort of infrastructure around about my life, and it was literally of no use to me, because no amount of no amount of educational qualification was going to help me achieve this result. In fact, I had to entirely give my body over to the laboratories, to the fertility clinic, to the doctors, to the specialists, to the lab technicians. And honestly, I hadn't thought about it at all at that point. I just thought, it'll be like blowing your nose, I'll go along and it'll all be easy and straightforward. And nothing could have been further from the truth.
That must have been hugely challenging. We probably don't realize what women go through going through these treatments. I'm really excited to hear about this, and my heart is with you in this as well. You're certainly a very strong woman, high achiever. However, this is one thing in your life that you were desperate to achieve, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And although it is a bit of a cliche to say it, the process of fertility treatment, I think no matter the outcome, so whether you're successful or whether you're not, it's still a huge roller coaster. And just to give a little bit of insight into what's happening when you do then start having treatment. So I had a process initially called IUI, which is stands for intrauterine insemination. And just to try and explain it a little bit more, it's the process itself is basically you're matched with donor sperm. Obviously, you have your own eggs, and it's a bit like going for a smear test with a catheter, and they use the catheter to insert the donor sperm. Yeah. So that's the process. But of course, what's happening in between all of that is what for me became quite obsessive charting of my cycle. So when was I going to be ovulating? Okay, there's 2 days in the month where you get this little happy face on the ovulation test kit. And I would get that test kit, and then I would be off to Aberdeen the next day to get the treatment. And then I'd spend 2 weeks thinking, this is it. This is it. This is going to be the one. And of course, in my first treatment, I absolutely naively assumed this was going to be the life-changing treatment, and it was all going to be sealed and dealed with that one treatment. And so 2 weeks later, when of course my period came, there's no baby because your period is there. And not to put too fine a point on it, but it was utterly devastating. At that point in my journey, I was so convinced that science and the medical professionals were going to be able to give me the child that I had longed for many years. So that kind of, there's the process bit, which is not the most pleasant, you know, and we don't all naturally sign up for things that feel quite difficult for us sort of personally, emotionally, physically, and then to kind of be disappointed at the end of that. Nonetheless, I got myself back on the wagon, and next month it was the same, wait for the happy face on the ovulation test kit, next day off to Aberdeen. This time I was a bit better prepared because I kind of knew what was going to be expected of me. So I was a lot less anxious, a lot less nervous, and I wasn't wriggling up the bed trying to get away from the nurse. So that was quite, I guess, helpful in terms of going back for the second time. But that happened for 8 treatments, and none of them were successful. So
incredible. And a 200, and I'd like to point out for anyone that doesn't know, Lisa, this would be an over 200-mile round trip every time as well, from where you live to Aberdeen, on not the best roads. My goodness, 8 times, Lisa. I didn't realise it was so many times. You are a phenomenon.
Well, I guess that's what all women in the Highlands and Islands area, anywhere between here and Aberdeen, if you want fertility treatment, that's where you have to go. And, you know, a woman's cycle waits for no one. So that is when the optimum time is, that's when you need to go. And I spent a lot of those journeys, particularly when I traveled by myself, journaling. And that was one of the things I wanted to sort of touch on briefly today, was what kind of got me through some of those difficult times. So I would journal, again, quite obsessively about the treatment, about every single little detail of the treatment room, of the little chapel that I would go to, how I felt about things, who I met on the journey. And that was really just a kind of catharsis, a way to try and get out what I was feeling inside, because at that point, I was, I guess, I had this persona, this kind of work persona, this professional woman. And so kind of letting myself be vulnerable and talking about the devastation that I felt at not falling pregnant month after month. And then we would have some investigations, further referral to different services for scans and different tests, and all of those not really showing anything at that stage that I needed to be worried about. So yeah, I guess in terms of the change from this kind of fairly rigid, fairly direct, clear, knew where she was going, to this kind of hot, messy puddle on the bathroom floor every month when these things weren't working. yeah, that was probably one of the trickiest things. And then as you progress through IUI, by the time you get to 7 and 8, they start to give you some drugs. So it's called drug assisted IUI, to try and boost your system, to grow basically the size of what they call follicles. And follicles are basically your eggs, but they're trying to increase the size of those eggs so that when it meets the sperm, that there's a greater surface area. I'm not a technical expert on this, I should say, but that's my lay person's understanding of what they're trying to do. And so again, initially I was thinking, it's okay, we've got 8 turns. Okay, don't be silly. Of course, it was never going to work the first time, but you've got another 7 to go, or you've got another 5 to go. So constantly in a dialogue in my head, trying to rationalize my chances of success, trying to hope. And I think that's probably something that's important to mention as well, this idea that you fill yourself full of hope. You know, we're kind of encouraged that we can dream things real, you know, and if you just believe hard enough, it's going to be okay. And I bought into everything, you know. I drank the raspberry tea, I did yoga, I didn't drink alcohol, I followed all the rules. I was the best woman that I possibly could be in order to, you know, be as successful with treatment. But actually none of that worked. None of it really worked. And I'm not saying don't do those things. I certainly wouldn't counsel anybody to do that. But I kind of had this real hope, try to control as much as I could. And then every month, over about, or maybe it wasn't every month, I think there was some months where it was back to back. And then there was a period in the middle where I took a short break and we did some investigations instead. But that kind of hope being dashed. And then by the time I got to treatment 7 and 8, there was this kind of change in the process where you would go to Aberdeen on the 2nd day of your cycle. So day 1 of your cycle is typically the first day that you bleed. So I would bleed, it would be unsuccessful. And then on day 2, I would be booking my train tickets or driving back through to Aberdeen. And that was when I had the challenge of the internal scans. Whilst I was on day 2 of my period, I was thinking, I can't wrap my head around this, like something which is very intimate, very private, and all of a sudden we're going for more internal exams. And of course, the nurses are wonderful, the fertility nurses, specialists, they're absolutely fabulous, and they do everything that they possibly can to preserve your dignity, to, you know, to give you space, to support you. So I can't fault them. They were all absolutely wonderful nurses, but it brought up a huge sense of, or I guess, feelings of shame and vulnerability, and that I had to confront. I couldn't just sort of stuff them back down because it wasn't a one-off. It was a process that I was engaged in over a long period of time. So yeah, all the things that I maybe would have liked to have kept private, I didn't have an outlet for them because they're not really the things that we talk about that often as women. We might roll our eyes and say, oh, you know, more ibuprofen or cramps or PMT, but they're generally seen in a fairly negative sense.
They certainly are,
so I had to do a lot of unlearning, and then so we took a little break whilst you then go into the next different set of treatment, which is IVF, in vitro fertilization, which is probably what many people are more familiar with that process. And then we met a private donor. And so fertility clinics are all highly regulated and governed by specific legislation guarding the anonymity of the donors, but also the rights of the child upon reaching 18 to know who their donor might be. There's obviously all the health screening that takes place in terms of the donor, you know, who they are, what their background is, the quality of their sperm donation, and so on. so and then there's a lot of questions of you as well in terms of your lifestyle and just your own health and your own lifestyle. And then we met this a couple privately, and he had fathered I think 3 children, and an absolutely wonderful man. So if he's ever watching this, my absolute heart goes out to him for what he has done to create other families. And so I'll not go into all of that detail because it's like a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But that was a very different process. And I guess I had always felt a sense that I would love to have known the donor, because that was something that I felt was important or could be important for any future child that I may have.
Yes.
And I really wanted that. But of course, the medical route doesn't allow you that to happen. Just the way the legislation protects donors.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really wanted that to work. And I'll spare you lots of jokes about turkey basters and lambing kits, but that is what it was like.
Yeah.
And again, not having those sort of social scripts for how do you welcome an anonymous donor into your home or you into his home, and just there's a lot of language and sort of stories around about that we don't hear about, and how do you deal with that? So again, I was quite silent about it. I didn't talk to too many people about it at the time, but journaling a lot.
Journaling is amazing. It's life-saving, I think. I'm surrounded by journals. I've got one for lots of different things on the go all the time. And I loved going back to them and dipping in and going, oh, that was the lesson I was learning then. But my goodness, and if you get in, getting it down in black and white takes it, especially if it's something that is challenging and eating away at your soul, I think gives it an escape as well. And yes, it makes it real, but also it's very cathartic. And yeah, I am a fellow journaler and always will be. If you saw my desk right now, it's covered in them.
Yeah. Well, I guess from there, none of those cycles were successful. So he wasn't a chap who lived locally. So again, there was that sort of similar text me when you think you might be ovulating to, kind of create that kind of schedule so that he could travel or we could travel, whichever it was. But none of those were successful either.
Oh my goodness.
I've gone from this, I'm finding this medical stuff just so invasive and so difficult to, this could be a much more relaxed way and this is nice, and it kind of, again, maybe my kind of idealistic kind of outlook on how things could be. But none of those cycles worked. So I think we did about 7 or 8 of those as well.
Wow.
So by this point, you're most definitely classed as unexplained infertility. So normally, if you're in a heterosexual couple, that would be if you had been trying to conceive for a year and hadn't been successful. Obviously, I was in a same-sex relationship, so there was no amorous lie down on a Friday night was going to let me fall pregnant.
Yeah.
So unexplained infertility. So I went for these tests, hysterosalpingogram, which always makes me laugh because it sounds like very close to the word hysterical, and that is pretty much how it made me feel at the time.
Oh my goodness.
But anyway, they do their test, and they're basically just making sure that the connections between your ovaries and your womb through your fallopian tubes are clear, and that there's kind of no blockages there. So anyway, got through that process, and there was nothing obvious. The only thing that I learned there was that, you know, that diagram that you often see of a woman's womb or her reproductive system, and it's sort of two ovaries and it's sort of triangle, and there's sort of loops connecting or tubes connecting.
Yeah.
So I honestly thought that's what my system would look like until I saw it on the screen when they were doing the hysterosalpingogram. And I was like, oh, it's like going up the Bialik na Ba, you know, it's like these kind of loopy, twisting roots. And one ovary was up here and one was down here. And I was thinking, gosh, that's fascinating. We really don't know very much about our bodies until we have to really look into them.
And what a journey these little sperm must have to, you know, they have to go on. You know, it's not like everything in life. It's not a straight there. It's like,
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things about fertility treatment is that there's a lot that you're shielded from if you are lucky enough to just fall pregnant just in the regular way. You don't have to think about all these things, whereas I was being exposed to all this new knowledge, this new experience, these new feelings over a fairly short period of time. And that was, I guess, a bit of an unraveling of me and what I thought I knew and who I thought I was. So then kind of fast forward to getting to the IVF treatment, or the start of IVF treatment. So again, there's more admin, more waiting, calling, hello, do you remember me? My name's Lisa, I'm on the list, blah, blah, blah. And again, lots more information sessions, more bloods. I don't think I've got any veins left yet for or now for people to take blood out of, because I've had so much taken. But anyway, so we got to the fertility treatment itself, or the IVF itself, and I had a sort of slight reaction to the drugs and the medication, and I got the instructions wrong, basically. And so, of course, I'm starting to beat myself up. What do you mean? How could I get that so wrong? How could I leave the consultation, not realize when I was supposed to start the protocol? So there's a lot of beating myself up throughout this process, even though there was a lot that I really couldn't control or influence. I still felt it was my fault, or that I was to blame, or that I wasn't in some way good enough, most capable enough, able enough, which I now know, of course, is not the case. But
it's not.
I was, if I could have had a master's in blaming myself, then I definitely would have got a distinction, which would have satisfied my overachieving self, but wouldn't have done much for my soul, that's for sure. Anyway, I took this bad reaction to the drugs, and I was at a conference at the time, and I spent most of that conference on the bathroom floor feeling pretty grim. And most women will know toilet floors are not the place to be. So you really would not choose to be there.
Definitely not.
Anyway, a few days later, I sort of spoke to my GP, and I just said, I just don't think I can do this anymore. I don't know what to do. And I'd come so far. We were now probably into the third year, sort of from the beginning of the process to the IVF. And I didn't think I could carry on. Even though I really desired to have a child, there was nothing left in me. Like, the hope was gone, and the kind of rallying that I had to keep doing month after month, it got less, but the desire got greater. So there's no sweet spot in there. Anyway, we started the down regulation of your system. Is basically where the kind of doctors sort of take over your menstrual cycle. So they use hormones, and you inject yourself every day for a certain time. Some people are on short protocols, some people are on long protocols. So injections every day for about 3 weeks. And even that, at that stage, I was very sensitive to, physically sensitive. You know, I knew I had to do it, And I have great admiration for people who, for other, more life-threatening conditions, have to do that on a daily basis. But it was just, I felt every single little thing was magnified, because emotionally I was so hurt, and I was so vulnerable, and very tense.
Everything would have been heightened, I would imagine. Every nerve ending would have been heightened.
It was. That's a very good way to describe it. So again, the goal with IVF is, and the drugs that they give you, is to grow as many of your follicles, your eggs, as possible, because they're trying to harvest those eggs. And so obviously every month when you menstruate, when at ovulation, an egg is released, and it's just one egg, and it will be the size that it is. But through IVF, they're trying to harvest as many eggs as they can possibly get to increase your chances of success. So I was advised that 10 eggs would be a good crop for that harvest. 5 from each ovary is generally what they're looking for. So over a period of about a week, I would be going back to Aberdeen every other day or every couple of days, so that they could scan me and measure the size of the follicles to see whether or not I would then come back the following day to have those eggs harvested. And in that process, they said to me, "Oh, you've got a cyst there. We'll try and aspirate that cyst so that it's easier to get at the eggs." So not really thinking very much, and fair enough. So I go back to, the next few days to have the cyst aspirated, and they give you a sort of a little bit of a painkiller and some antibiotics, because they're basically piercing your ovary with a knife. Not with a knife, sorry, cut that, with a needle.
Okay.
No knives were here.
No knives. Okay, but needles bad enough, Lisa. Needles bad enough.
Yes, and we've all got moments in life where we really strongly remember something, and I remember that needle going through the ovary, and then the nurses sort of making some signs. Oh, that's not what we expected. It's more of a kind of chocolate brown color as opposed to the clear color that a cyst would normally be. Anyway, I'm sitting there in blissful ignorance, trying to think about anything else, distract myself from where I am. And afterwards, one of the consultants comes and says, "Lisa, you've reported in the past a significant period pain, and you have some elevated level," I don't recall what that was now, but some elevated level in a blood test that would point to endometriosis. And these two facts, coupled with the fact that it wasn't a regular cyst, suggest that you have endometriosis. Now, endometriosis is not something that you can diagnose without seeing it, without a laparoscopy. But they were pretty much saying 99% certain. And that was a real seminal moment for me, where I realized I have not been listening to myself for a very long time. From the moment that my period started, and this was in pre-internet days, for your young listeners. And so we didn't have access to information, but I was certain that I had had endometriosis from being a late teen, I would say, regularly passing out from pain, doubled up with the pain, just all these kinds of symptoms. But after years of going back to the GP to try and going to consultants, there was no real answer. So eventually I just kind of internalized that and told myself that I wasn't strong enough, that I wasn't able to cope with, the most basic of period pains. So I'd kind of kept all this inside and internalized it. But in that moment, the doctor told me that, and I thought, that's a lesson. It's a really important lesson, that I'm only now going to start learning. So the symptoms were obvious of endometriosis. I was very quiet about it, apart from when I would be in public places and I would pass out, and people would say, "Do you need an ambulance?" And I'd be like, "No, I'll be fine in a minute."
I know what's wrong.
Desperately hoping that I could be transported back into my house or somewhere more appropriate to be dealing with it. So I started to think about all the ways in which I had not listened to myself, ways in which messages about women and our bodies and our cycles are at best ignored, but at worst actively used against us. And I started to think about that first IUI treatment where I just felt so ashamed. And of course, the nurses were wonderful. I have to stress that again and again. The nurses were absolutely wonderful. But no matter how wonderful they were, nothing took away from my feelings of shame, how I looked, how I was like handling things, how emotional I was, all these kind of critical sort of judgments sitting up here on my shoulder, or more accurately between my ears, punching me for
it's such
a
long, and it's not just a one-off, it's such a long period of your life to be feeling that. But we know, it's anyone listening, it's a huge lesson for everyone that we do know. Our bodies speak to us, and we have to listen, because, very often it's realizations that, like you've had, and getting that diagnosis quite a way on from when your period started, but you knew all that time. We need to fight the medical profession, although I know they've helped you greatly. But we need to stand up. Finding a doctor that you can stand up and say, "No, I know my body," too, is I'm sorry, few and far between. Anyway.
Well. Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I've done a lot of soul searching on this particular topic, and of course, nowadays, there's a lot greater awareness of endometriosis. Endometriosis UK does some great work raising awareness. There's a kind of average wait to diagnosis of 7 years. I definitely buck that trend. So overachieving yet again, 23 or 24 years.
Well done.
Not applaud it I was looking for.
No.
And of course, there some Endometriosis UK, I think, have representatives in the Highland area. So they're doing some really good and important work. But there was just this big lesson for me that I hadn't listened. And there was a real theme about that throughout my whole kind of adult life, really. So not entirely surprised to be given the diagnosis, slightly annoyed and frustrated that I hadn't been listened to, because we could have avoided a lot of this. I guess the kind of what I felt was quite a lot of kind of traumatic experiences. You probably would have gone straight to IVF, or at least certainly if I'd have had a choice, I would have, because it was probably never going to work. I mean, I say that not as a medical professional, but these questions certainly came up for me. So when back into the kind of IVF process, and we we went for the egg harvesting process, which was a few days later, and they got 6 eggs because one of my ovaries, unsurprisingly, didn't really respond because of the endometriosis. So they get 6 eggs. So I'm still rationalizing in my mind, 6 out of 10 is not bad, it's okay.
It's not bad.
It's fine. I keep and it's one thing about fertility treatment that it's so full of hope, because you want to create this child, whatever your circumstances, whether you're a lesbian in a same-sex relationship or you're a heterosexual couple, with fertility issues with either the guy or the woman, like you're still full of a huge amount of hope. But at the same time, there is this kind of harsh reality that the success rate is still only between 30 and 40%, sort of 30 to 40 years after IVF treatment or fertility treatment like this started to kind of become more mainstream.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So anyway, get these 6 eggs, and they say we'll do our work in the lab. So they the goal is they meet with the donor sperm, and hopefully they fertilize. So they said you can call back in a few days and let us know, or we'll let you know how we're getting on. So 2 days later, call and they say 4 eggs have fertilized. Come for treatment tomorrow, and we'll see what the situation is then. So we've gone from an ideal of 10 to an actual of 6 to 4 eggs being fertilized and capable, 4 eggs being fertilized. And then we go back for treatment, and there's only 1 embryo. In fact, it's not called an embryo at that stage, but there's only 1 egg and sperm that is strong enough, viable enough to be inserted into my womb. And so we go to, we're all gowned up. We go into the treatment room, and there's a lovely chap in the lab. So he's sort of in a side room, and there's just a little window, and it's all very respectful. They're not looking at you. It's all sort of, I don't know, done through hand signals or lots of experience on the part of these clinical staff.
Yeah. And
then a lovely nurse fertility specialist, who is explaining what's going to happen. So it's similar process in terms of the kind of catheter and being inserted, and you can watch this on a screen. So for me, all I could look at was the screen. So I was full of hope that there was this fertilized egg that was going to be passed basically into my womb. And I watched this tiny, tiny circle. It looked to me about 5 millimeters, but this tiny, tiny white circle be moved into my body and then into my womb. And then I think they did some counting, and there was this gentle release of this tiny little white circle. And that was my son.
Oh, Lisa.
That was my son. And those moments will absolutely stay with me forever. I can't tell you, after all this journey, what this felt like. Of course, at the time, I didn't know it was going to be successful, but there was only one egg that was fertilized out of the 4 that was strong enough to be implanted. And 2 weeks later, I did a pregnancy test, and here I am now with a 4-year-old son that is just the love of my life. So
he's gorgeous. He is. What a journey. He was worth the journey.
I would do it all again. To have my son. I'm not sure that I would do it again to have another. It was a huge journey emotionally for me as a woman. And then, of course, I loved being pregnant. It was probably the best time in my life up until that point. I had some challenges myself with some gestational diabetes and some pain and difficulty, but it didn't matter. Anything could have happened to me and I wouldn't have cared. I just had this beautiful baby boy growing in my belly, and after years I felt so grateful, and all I could do was talk to him and love him and hold him and just tell him how wonderful this was going to be.
Absolutely. And he
So
changed the trajectory of your life completely.
it really did. And although there would be a lot more changes for me to come after he was born, I can honestly say that without fertility treatment, it was kind of life-saving in a way. And I don't mean in the traditional sense of my life was at immediate risk. It wasn't, but it was life-saving in that it opened me up to who I am and who I wanted to be and how I wanted to live. And although it would take me many, many years, and I'm still on that journey, I'm most definitely not sort of the kind of, it's not complete, I suppose, the story.
It never will be. It goes on. I think, Lisa, it goes on and on. You know, for a woman in her take it from a woman in her 60s, and I'm not being ageist. It goes on, and you know, with her children, that they're always our children, and they're always life changing, and and we just go on. And I know you're a great learner. You will go on developing and changing for the rest of your life, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so. Now maybe I've learned how to do that, I suppose.
Yeah.
And since then I kind of started to embrace feminism, women's rights, writing from my own life experience, discovering the Red Tent movement. And I was always supposed to be the woman that I am now, but it was always in my head theoretically. You know, I always wanted to write, for example, and lo and behold, I didn't know as I was going through fertility treatment that I would be writing a book about fertility treatment. I'm now working on the second draft of my memoir about fertility treatment. You know, I have been doing a lot of activism in relation to women's rights in various different networks and groups that I'm a part of. And suddenly embracing who I am as a middle-aged woman with a young son. And although I couldn't be more delighted.
Yeah.
But I suppose I almost want to qualify that in some way by saying, these are difficult journeys, these are difficult choices to make. But the rewards are so incredibly worth it. And I don't just mean in terms of becoming a mother and having a son. I mean, I can't imagine a more enriching experience or a more challenging one.
Yeah.
But there's something about having been kind of so kind of broken down emotionally in these moments. And like a kind of compression fracture, you know, it gets worse on, you know, the more pressure. And then coming through the other side of that and thinking, actually, this is who I am. This is what I'm here to do. And for me, that is writing, speaking about women's issues in a way that I'm not ashamed of, or I'm not embarrassed of. I don't always get it right, or I think afterwards I could have been a bit more graceful or a bit better in the way that I explained that. But that's part of the search, isn't it? It's part of the...
Definitely is. It definitely is. I'm really excited to read your book. Well done, second draft. It takes some self-discipline to sit down and do it, doesn't it? I'm in the middle of writing my book as well at the moment, and I have to do the time. And if I don't write it down, I don't do it. That's another thing that journaling has taught me. And you know, as far we need more women like you, Lisa, that will stand up for us. We need to all stand up for ourselves, but you know, and I've got to say, you do it so eloquently and with such passion. And I've also got to thank you, because it was through you sending me Jean Houston's lecture on for Altered States conference that re-triggered my want to start. It goes back to 15 years ago. I wanted to start this wonderful women movement, but of course, life and work and all that took over, and I didn't. But when you sent me that lecture, oh my God, I've listened to it so many times. I've sent it to other people, and she is stating that the main gist of it, although there was so much in it, but that this is the time of women. This is we are the heroines of our time, and it's us that is going to change the world. It's not slating men. Men are wonderful, but they have been the heroes, and they have been running things for long enough. If we want change, it's the women that are going to change the world. And you are one of those women, my darling.
Well,
definitely.
that's a great honour. I'm in good company.
Thank you. And I have absolutely loved listening to this beautiful story. I've still got a tear in my eye. I can see that screen, and that was your son. I love that. And that was my son. How beautiful. Lisa, how beautiful. I will put a link through to your probably your Facebook page. Would that be the thing to do in the description?
Yeah, that's fine.
Or your website.
My website probably is more use, a bit more traffic.
Okay, and I will do all that, and I thank you very much, and I hope you will come back in future seasons where we will have other questions. But for today, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing.
Lovely. Thank you for asking.
My pleasure.